All right. Welcome, everybody, to Standing for Truth. My name is Donny, and I am your host for this next session, session 3 to be specific, of our Defending Genesis conference. I am pumped for this one. We've got legends of young earth creation, John Mackay, the creation guy, and Joe Hubbard, two of my favorite defenders of the faith. Gentlemen, as always, thank you for giving us your time for specifically this our annual conference. How are we doing today?
Well, I'm doing all right. I'm in South Australia at the moment, and I'm equipped at least with a boomerang and things like that, given the title of our talk. And it's been, well, relatively different. We've had a few storm fronts, so we're praying we won't get one this morning because the screen will go all shattery if we do. But no, everything's fine down here, and great to be with you again, Donny.
And I'm doing all right. I'm not equipped with boomerangs, but I am equipped with an Egyptian hieroglyphic dictionary in 2 parts, which is fascinating reading, but it has a lot to do with boomerangs. And that's what we're going to be discussing about today. So we're looking forward to that. And it's pretty bleak and awful here as well at the moment, but we've been preparing for some exciting times coming up. So you'll hear a little bit more about what we've been up to in just a little bit.
Awesome. Well, the creation research team is a fan favorite here on Standing for Truth, and I'm excited for this session, from Boomerangs to Babel and Back. And so to the audience, we are going to interact with your questions at times. We do have presentations as well, of course. So please, if you do have a question for Joe or John, just send them in. Keep it on topic as much as possible, of course. And so I guess we'll just get right into it. John, I think we'll hand it right back to you.
Okay, thanks, Donny. We'll just, while I've still got the screen before I swap onto slides, and not only do we have boomerangs, I bought some lovely stone axes in, Australian Aboriginal stone axes, of course, and they'll be challenging in the way you think about design. And we're going to be dealing with, from, as Donny said, boomerangs to Babel and back again, and they are all interconnected. It's not just a play on the word boomerang, but the history of what we've been able to find out. It makes you wonder, did Noah throw a boomerang off the ark just to see if it would come back after the flood? Interesting speculation there. But first of all, it's quite a while since we've been on Standing for Truth. So in the next 90 minutes or so, Joe's first job, my first job is to actually give you a ministry report. And if I can now sort of swap back over to my slides, Donny, I'll just get them up there. I should be on screen now, correct, with the picture?
Yes, looks good, John.
Good, okay. There's our new Sam designed logo and our touch from Australia. You can always get in touch with us through creationresearch.net or follow up the various offices there. And just to visit Jurassic Ark again, that's our first museum. We now have 3 in Australia, and 1 in England and 1 coming up in the USA, but more about that later. Do you see the big monster? There's Craig Hawkins, our Tasmanian director there. There's John Mackay, the creation guy. And we are standing behind well, I guess you could say it's a beautiful representation of a giant creature from Australia's past. Not too distant past. It's actually a giant goanna. Yes, we still have goannas in Australia. There they are, beside a pile of grass. And when my wife sees one of those down the backyard, she really loses it. But they're only tiny compared with what they used to be. And we know they used to be bigger because here's the skeleton. On the left-hand side is a present-day skeleton. On the right-hand side is the fossil. Bone for bone, tooth for tooth, jaw for jaw, they are the same creature. They used to be monsters, now they're midgets. And we're just about to add a 3D section on giant roos at Jurassic Ark, so that you can come to Jurassic Ark and not only dig fossils, you can not only see some of the experiments which we'll talk about today, you can actually see how big creatures used to be. I mean, left-hand side, 1 fossil giant kangaroo. Right-hand side, a present day, the biggest. They used to be monsters, now they're midgets. And of course, we live in Australia where here's the latest book on the origin of kangaroosters, it looks Evolution and Biogeography Australian Vertebrates. Now, one of the authors there is Dr. Michael Archer. Now, some of you may remember that I've actually debated Michael on the ABC. He is not very keen on either creation or people who promote creation or people who actually believe it. Interesting country we live in, but then that's pretty much all around the globe. Now, when you have a look, there's our theme for all of our museums. It's straight out of the Bible. Beware of false science, it will lead you astray. Yes, we've used the old King James science there because the newer translations would use the word knowledge, but putting it together, science is the old Latin/Greek word for knowledge. Doesn't matter whether it's what we call physics and chemistry or biology, or whether it's knowledge of politics or economics. False anything leads you astray. Okay, so here's the issue we'll be getting through. What about the Aboriginal people in Australia? There's what the Bible says. If you read it fairly literally and you try and add it up, I've done it 3 times, and you get pretty much the same sort of answer, plus or minus a little bit, from the first man, Adam, to Noah, 4,300 years ago, to the Tower of Babel, to Abraham, to Moses, and of course it's 2023 AD, and the AD referring to Jesus Christ, of course. And there's an Aboriginal pastor. I preach for that man. And on the left-hand side is one of my mining colleagues, and on the right-hand side is me, fairly worn and cold in the winter down there. But the old Aboriginal gentleman, he's had to put up with a whole haranguing from, well, we just had a big referendum in Australia about native rights and Aboriginal voting and things like that. And they were telling us that the Aborigines have been here for 65,000 years. And I bought a boomerang in, I bought an Aboriginal stone tool, and we'll be looking at the evidence today on how long they've actually been here. And of course, the evidence of what's in the Bible. And there, by the way, is the first lecture, academic lecture, ever recorded. It's actually to a group of Greek academics, not fundamentalist believers, but Greek pagan academics. Paul is reminding them that even they, with their views of evolution, were actually made from one man, Adam. And they were in Greece, same as he was, so that those people would seek the Lord. Now, as my Aboriginal pastor, who's become a Christian, says, that's why we are here in Australia. But he doesn't believe the 65,000 years ago. Neither do we. You see, there's a biblical picture. Yes, you can say John Mackay takes the Bible literally. He makes no apologies for that. So when I'm reading the history sections, I take them as history. When I'm reading the poetry sections, I take them as poetry. But Genesis, where this information comes from, is actually a history book. Only one bit of poetry in it where Adam describes his wife. Bone of bone, flesh of my flesh, she shall be called woman. That's the only poetic statement. It sort of would translate into modern, wow, what a good looking chick she is. But you realise the bottom bit? Aboriginal Jews and Jews can't have been on the planet more than 4,200 years. Interesting. Not 65,000 years. So what actually is the evidence against, yes, you heard me right, against the old earth and for a young? No, that doesn't look like an Aboriginal. It's certainly not a verse out of the Bible. It's one of the herringbone ferns that I grow. Beautiful, isn't it? Because what we do with these at Jurassic Ark is we put them on clay. All sorts of ferns we grow at Jurassic Ark deliberately, because we notice that many of the fossils, particularly in my area of coal, are ferns, fern trees, all sorts of ferns, and the evidence shows they were buried green. So here we have fern embedded in a block of clay, which is just about to be vacuum packed. And along with the herringbone ferns, there they are, buried. Well, they're buried in a plastic bag, which is then vacuum packed, and they're pressed absolutely flat. The force of gravity, force of the atmosphere is on the top of the bag, and they're pressed into the clay. What sort of clay? It's kaolin. Why kaolin? Well, my experience shows me that that's the clay you find in coal. That's the dominant clay you find in all fossil beds. Yes, you find some bentonite clays around the planet from volcanic ashes, but the dominant clay found in shales, is kaolin, the one that pottery people use. After 14 days, do you notice something? Yes, we date all our bags. We keep good track records that most of the leaves have actually carbonized of a sort. 14 days, get close up. There's still some that are slightly green, but most of them have gone jet black. By the time you've got 24 days after you started the experiment, well, I'll tell you what, it just looks like a fossil. And by the time you get to 58 days, the whole lot has gone carbon black, just looking like a fossil fern. Okay, now let's try and join all the dots here. This is true for any plant, and it's true whether you put the plant on the top of the clay, as in the right side of this. This was a clay sandwich experiment, so we put one fern, one plant, poor man's spinach really, on the top of the clay, and the other one was inside. Notice they've both been carbonized. And our experiment, our display at Jurassic Ark, I think we're the only creation museum which has evidence that you can make coal quickly. Yes, we can even make coal, and we can make methane gas, and we can make fossils, not with vast amounts of time, but with clay, and recently with more than atmospheric pressure. You see, if you vacuum pack the bag, there's certainly 14 pounds per, square inch pressing on the bag. Well, we invested in a 12-ton press and pressed it down, and you see the tube at the bottom coming out. It's connected up to this. And at the top of this, which just looks like a bullet that you'd strike, it's actually tailor-made for this experiment so that it will be absolutely airtight when it pushes into the cylinder that's slightly wider at the bottom. Pulling it apart, yes, you're quite right. All these experiments cost a lot of money. So if you want to make donations, listen to Joe. I'm sure he'll be happy to tell you where all the money can be going to if you want to help us with the costs of these. These are highly machined so that there is no leak spots. There's the big cylinder. Into that, we'll put the clay, the white clay, the kaolin clay, and or the kaolin-rich clay, and we'll put the fossil. Then above that, we'll put that middle washer, which is a nylon washer, which is squashed by almost the bullet impression at the bottom right-hand side. And then we stand it up on that big leather. See the odd-shaped leather thing at the bottom? That's what we squash it onto. Then we'll replace that with the iron plate at the top left-hand side and push out what we get. Because there it is in operation. The 12-ton press is just about to come down on it. The clay in the cylinder will now be squashed. The slowest part of this, by the way, is waiting for all the air and the water to actually squeeze out through the leather. The clay won't do it. The particles are too big. But the leather and the air and the water actually makes its way through that bottom bit. And we have to slow it down every now and then because some of you know water is incompressible, and so we'd get nowhere if the water didn't leave. Well, there's the end result. Do you see that brownish marks, the orange marks? What we've been doing now is realizing one thing. When you make shale, which is largely clay, 70 to 80% clay, 70 to 80% kaolin clay, the stuff with the best fossils in it, it's actually compressed. And you'll find that the compression in the real world, think of Noah's flood. Without Adam, there'd be no death. With no death, there'd be no fossils. With no Noah's flood, there'd be nothing to compress the fossils. Compress? Yes, way more than 12 ton, because not only do you have the weight of the mud, the weight of the clay, you have tons and tons of water, much more than our 12-ton press. And it would compress everything that was buried in Noah's flood. All right, now here's our curator. He's the guy that I give the orders to, and he bounces back with good and better suggestions sometimes. And then I bounce back and say, all right, let's do it. And you're in charge of digging it out. One fossilized toad. By the way, they're not usually that skinny or that flat. You put 12 tons of pressure on them and they really do flatten up. There he is, squashed. But you notice what color is gone? They don't start out as black, but they end up in the clay as black. And so did the ferns. This started out bright green, and it was bright green in wet clay, in wet kaolin clay. Then we put the pressure on it, and within a day, it's carbonized. Now, if you notice, you've seen that before, it was here. Top left-hand side is a real fossil in real shale. I dug that up out at the Ipswich coal measures. And when you actually, look at the bottom right-hand side. The actual fossil is still there. You can lift it off. And so I have quite a large collection of fossils that are just pulled out of the shale in 3 dimensions, but a very flat version of 3 dimensions. And the fossil is no longer green fern. It's absolutely carbonized. Do it again. Except this time, this is the one we actually made artificially. The leaves of the fern are now jet black. It happens after 28 days without pressure. It happens in 1 or 2 days with pressure. So you can lift up the right-hand side, lift the leaf off. The leaf is still there. It's now no longer green like you saw it being and bagged. It's now black carbon. And you've also got some other byproducts like methane. Well, we actually have done some other experiments. See the white tube? That's the kaolin clay. You see the fossil inside? Yes, when you have a look at it, we can fossilize insects. We can fossilize cockroaches, and they go to be absolutely flat, squashed by 12 tons of pressure. And then the kaolin, I'll tell you what, they make a lovely fossil in 1 day. That's all that took, 1 day. Everything's beautifully preserved. Nothing can escape except the fluids. And the fluids from inside the cockroach will actually generate some chemistry in the shale. So you get brown residues. And probably if you wanted to keep going and squash enough, you'd end up with some oils from these creatures. Again, the point, and you've heard me and Joe say it a long time. You've heard us say it a long time, but it's not an issue of time. Time doesn't make the slightest difference in these experiments. It's the process. You have the right process, you don't need a long time. You have the wrong process, slow burial, you need a long time. The evolutionist has picked the wrong process. That's why he thinks he needs millions of years. That's why we make that point and will continue to make it. It's never the evidence which contradicts what God's word said about the flood or creation or the Tower of Babel. But do you know the rest of what Peter wrote? The willing ignorance, the deliberate ignorance, the choice to ignore the actual evidence. You know, we have geologists come and watch some of these experiments, and many of them go away saying, wow, I didn't know that. But quite a few of them go away saying, that can't be true. It has to be a trick. These can't be real experiments. These are just toys that are designed to trick us. Well, you see, the real history of change is that one. The Bible says the Word of God who was there, the Word of God being Jesus Christ, the Creator, that back in the beginning, everything was very good. Adam never went on a field trip in his life. Would you believe that? I don't know how he could have been happy without digging up fossils, but in reality, it never would have occurred to him. Nothing died. Then sin came in and death followed. By the time we get past Adam's day, he's dying at age 930, and we're impressed with how long he lived. You shouldn't be. You should be distressed at how short his life was. By the time we get to the flood, Methuselah, the longest lived man on the planet, has just died before the flood starts. Then there's the Tower of Babel. And of course, that leads up to a world where you need to share Jesus with indigenous peoples everywhere, Eskimos, Inuits, with the Native American Indians, with indigenous Australians. But if you teach them they've been here for 65,000 years, you ain't got nothing to say about Jesus that would benefit them at all in the 70 or 80 years they might live till they die. And you do take your Bible seriously, don't you? It is given to man once to die, and after that there is a judgment by the holy, righteous God. All right, there's the history. Do you believe it? because all of our experiments are based on finding things that actually fit that pattern. I remember talking to a professor of Middle Eastern history down in Sydney University, and I asked him, could you fit the biblical short chronology into the whole of history? Could you fit the whole of your Middle Eastern history into the short biblical chronology? Asked it 2 ways. And he said, yes, we could. I said, well, why don't you? He said, we don't want to. Now, that was it. Willing ignorance. You see, the recent referendum we've had in Australia, and the thing which will be the content of much of the rest of the talk from Joe and me, deals with how long have people been around? What about Boomerangs got to do with it? Both Jews and Aborigines. Surprise, surprise, they're in both histories. But you tell them they've been here for 65,000 years and you have no gospel to preach to anybody, white or black, tall, short, pygmy, Zulu, you name it. You see, here's the punchline, and I'll give it to you before we repeat it back at the end. There is no salvation unless you're in Adam's family. Oh, I know that there are so many churches teach, just get on with the gospel, don't worry about the age of the earth. But if you have people who are not descended from Adam, there is no savior, there's no salvation. If their ancestors were not on Noah's Ark, then there's no gospel for them. There is no God who is their creator who could die in their place. And if your people were not at Babel, I'm sorry, the whole of gospel is irrelevant to you. In fact, the devil knows that, even if many Christians don't. Can I encourage you? False knowledge leads you away from Christ. Beware of false knowledge, the Bible tells you. It actually destroys your confidence in the gospel of Jesus Christ. True knowledge points you to Christ. Now, true knowledge doesn't save you, but it tells you Jesus Christ is the only way, and the evidence backs that up. That's a key point at all our museums. Joe's one in England, which he'll tell you about shortly, our new one in Brisbane, our Jurassic Ark, the oldest one, and we've got a new one coming up in the US of A shortly. We'll get to tell you about that in some future editions. All right, now Joe's going to take over shortly, and I'll come off the screen here and get myself back if I can. There we are.
All right. Yeah, I'm just going to do a slightly shorter presentation than what John did, but just to kind of just run down and to tell you a little bit about what we've been doing in the UK, because yes, it has been just a little while since we were last on, but hopefully you can see that up on the screen now. I'm just going to run through a few quick slides, and then I've got a few things to show you in person. But yes, on the slide, you can see 3 QR codes, 3 different ways that you can support the Ministry of Creation Research, and ways that you can donate to us. Just scan it on the screen. In particular, the UK and the USA are both tax deductible. So do go and check those out and see how you can support the work that we're doing all over the planet. All right, this is the big thing that we've spent time on since we were last with you. I think the last time we were with you over Christmas time, we would have done it from the Creation Research Centre here in the UK. But we've been busy renovating and sorting out and setting up our museums project here in the UK. We've also been over to the USA as well. We're now well over 30,000 fossils and artifacts in our collection, and you'll see some of them in a moment, including some of our rather spectacular archaeological collections, because it goes beyond just the fossils into the natural history, geology, and into the archaeology. And I'm actually sitting in our library at the moment, and you can see a whole load of our research books from all over the world, and they're really vital for sort of doing what Scripture tells us to do, which is to test all things, to prove all things, to check all things. And you'll see us doing some checking today with regards to some Egyptian hieroglyphs and writing and grammar and so on and so forth. But there's the museum at the moment. This week, we've been busy painting and renovating and doing up and preparing and all sorts of stuff. It's been a wonderful week of fellowship as well as working. And if you're in the UK and want to come and volunteer, do get in touch, because the place is going from strength to strength. And by next year, we want to have it fully self-guiding as we go around the whole of the museum and get everything on display. But at the moment, you can come and take tours around. This is what it's currently like upstairs, or rather, this is what it was like upstairs about a week ago. It's been fully renovated up there since then, but it's a great chance to be able to come and see the enormous collection, as well as some of the spectacular evidence that you can find inside, including things like this. This is actually Dr. Glenn Wilson. He's our USA representative at the moment. So you can see him on Creation Conversations, which is our YouTube program, which goes out every week. He's on there, and he's actually holding a fossil which technically belongs to Craig Hawkins, who runs our Tasmanian museum. But it was in the USA, so he shipped it to Glenn first before we work out how to get it onto Tasmania. But you'll probably be able to recognize what kind of fossil that Glenn is holding. It's actually a Jurassic dragonfly. These are the original Jurassic rocks, by the way, because it's from the Solnhofen in Germany. And it was those rocks in Germany at the base of the Jura Mountains that the Jurassic is actually named after. Named after the rocks in the Jura Mountains, named by Alexander von Humboldt, who recognized that these rocks go all around the world. And they all have remarkable evidence of flooding in them. So these are the original Jurassic rocks, and these are, at the Solnhofen, are supposed to be 159 million years old. And yet the only evidence you can see in it are things like this Jurassic dragonfly, which shows you that even if the rocks are 159 million years old, dragonflies have changed into dragonflies. So it's a great classic example of a living fossil, and it was actually a living fossil that we've focused on this year with our main exhibition. We had a big exhibition that we set up for a big conference, one of the largest education conferences in the UK. And we set it up for that convention and turned that into then an exhibition for here in the museum, all about living fossils, and it's really rather fascinating. Of course, if you get to come to one of our museums, one of the things you'll quickly learn is that, or quickly find out, is that our main emphasis at these museums is to teach people that all things were made by Jesus Christ. Because you'll find that in both your Old Testament and your New Testament, it's Jesus Christ who's not only the Savior, not only the sustainer, he's the creator as well, and he is the coming King. So beware of this knowledge, but also rejoice in the fact that all things that were made by Jesus, even though we live in a broken and fallen world today, they were all originally made very good. And it's a big part of what we try and promote and do in creation research. So go and check out the creationresearchcenter.com, which you'll be able to go and see some of the newly revamped websites with all of our programs and projects on. Support the Global Museum Ministry and sign up to the Creation Research newsletters. We have ones that go out in the UK, in soon to be in the USA, and also internationally as well. So go and check those out, and check out our YouTube channel as well. I know that Sam is around on the chat, and Doki's around on the chat putting stuff out about creation research, so thank you for that. But yes, we have really exploded with our YouTube content in the last little while, so it's good to sort of be following in the footsteps of Standing for Truth. But go and check out Creation Conversation, goes out every week. Indiana Joe's Road Trip is a new program we started doing a couple of years ago, and it's one of our more popular programs as well, which is really just following me around doing geology and seeing what we can find. So you can see here in this one, in this episode, we found some spectacular polystrate trees. So go and check out Indiana Joe's Road Trip. There's a new season that's just gone out, and new, certainly since the last time we were on Standing for Truth. And big thanks to Sam for this, for really setting it off. And it's proving to be very popular. We have a live 24/7 broadcast, a live stream, which goes out around the clock on Creation Research YouTube channel called Creation Research TV. If you have a smart television, you can put it up running all the time. You can put it up in church lobbies, in restaurants, in all sorts of stuff. It's a fantastic way of getting creation research content out to you 24/7, and that's really starting to take off, and soon we'll have schedules and programs and all sorts of stuff ready to go on it. So go and check out Creation Research TV as well. Coming up, some fun stuff. We're preparing for our first ever Christmas parade. This is in the Creation Research Center downstairs, but you can see Susie one of our workers who's very stylishly modeling the ride-on dinosaur costumes that we got. We were going to have a whole set of dinosaurs on the back of the trailer with people following along, and you can see just how fun some of this stuff is. You just imagine, I think these have become rather famous on the internet, these kind of blow-up dinosaurs, but it's good fun. But we will also be handing out gospel tracts. We will be handing out information about creation research. So just pray for us, if you're Christians out there, for the work that we're doing, as well as the outreach that we're doing, that people would be reached with the gospel by this as well. Last couple of things before we take the slides down, and I'll just show you one or two quick fossils before we get into the real meat. I don't do social media too much, and I tried to start up a blog a few years back, which never really went anywhere. So we've kind of shut that down. But what we have started doing, and we're already getting lots of content up, is every day or so, I'll put up little snippets of information about what I'm doing and what you can pray for and where I'm traveling and what I'm digging up and all that kind of stuff on a Telegram channel. I like the Telegram channel, not just for its security, but also the fact that I can just kind of treat it like a, almost like a blog, and just put up a few photos and comments and Bible verses and so on and so forth as we go. So if you're interested, you can go and find me on the public Telegram channel, Joe Hubbard CR. There's the QR code and the link there. So go and check that out, and I'll try and put a link up in the comments as well, so that you can go and follow me on the Telegram channel, and a reminder of how you can actually support us as well. And there's all sorts of information like this on our websites. But I just want to show you, Donny, if you want to bring me back on camera, I just want to show you one or two quick little fossils, new things that we've found over the last little while, including starting with this rather fantastic fossil from near the Whitby area in the last road trip that I went to. That's up in Yorkshire. And some of you might recognize what this is, particularly if you watched the debate that I did with Snake Was Right a little while back on the Standing for Truth channel. These are actually fossil ginkgos, and I use these as examples of change, which did not mean evolution. What are we talking about? Well, you can see the beautiful examples of these ginkgos and the big, long, lovely fronds that they have. And the modern ones only have two of these fronds, two of these lobes. That's why the modern ones are called ginkgo biloba. These are ginkgo huttonii, named after James Hutton, the famous geologist from the north, introduced us to the concept of uniformitarianism. So he's got a connection to creation geology, or anti-creation geology rather. But the one thing you know for sure, in 175 million years, the only change you can see in these fossils, that is if the 175 million years is accurate, which of course we don't believe it is, but if that is a real time, the only thing that's happened in 175 million years is that ginkgos have shrunk slightly. In other words, not only are they still living fossils because they're still ginkgos, they haven't actually evolved at all. So not only are they evidence of living fossils, no evolution, but actually evidence of devolution. So that's a great new example, which is going into our creation research museum display on living fossils. And I also just want to show you one rather, well, it looks slightly insignificant, and it looks just like a sort of a little piece of wood, but I don't know how well it'll sort of show up on the camera, but you might just be able to see in there's some sort of greeny coloration, and there's actually some flecks of shiny metal. Well, what's interesting about this is actually permineralized. It's effectively petrified wood. It's Roman, as in from the Roman times. It comes from the island of Cyprus, and it was actually a pit prop. You know what they'd use to prop up their mines in their pits that they were digging? But it's become so waterlogged, and it's now very heavy. In fact, it's actually metallic. Why? Because copper has fully impregnated this wood all the way through, and so you've actually ended up with a permineralized, a petrified piece of wood which has been preserved in copper, and it's well under, well, the reality is this happened before the wood actually had chance to rot away, and it's preserved a 2,000-year-old piece of wood absolutely beautifully. So a great example of process, not time, a great example of rapid fossilization, and also some of the processes behind the kind of experiments that we do at creation research regarding permineralization and petrification, and that's a really nice find as well. But a little bit later we'll be talking about a teeny tiny little find, or rather an acquisition. It's actually a little Egyptian scarab beetle. And there's something really rather significant about this scarab beetle, and it has everything to do with that little round bit that is in the middle of it. But we'll talk about that a little bit later. So, John, back to you to really kick things off.
Thanks, Joe. Give me the full screen there, Donny, please. And you will have noticed Joe's clay, rich Yorkshire shales with the ginkgo in, just like in our compression machine. We are duplicating what's out there in real life, and you didn't need more than 24 hours in replicating that fossil to actually prove time is not needed, but process is. Now, I brought in a few things that are related today, but a twist. Now, this is a tool. It's a little cutter. It comes from Western Australia. It's part of our Aboriginal stone tool collection. And I like giving it to people and asking them to use it. You know, you can see the sharp edge there, and they all pretty well use it, but they don't notice one thing, and neither have you so far, because the same thing is evident in this tool here. So when you look at this, there's a little hand axe, and I give it to people, and they put it in their hand and they juggle it till it gets comfortable, and then they proceed to show me how it would have used. But, you know, when you're looking at design, it's not just the arguments we use like in Boomerangs. You know, we have a brilliant formula for creation. A creation's anything that can't happen by itself. And the design in Boomerangs is very self-evident. Nobody believes that could have ever got to this lovely boomerang shape, which is the topic of our subject today, boomerangs to Babel and back again. That couldn't have happened by itself. That indicates the evidence of design. But you look at this and you say, that's just a flake that's conveniently shaped. No, you see, this flake fits your right hand, but it doesn't fit your left hand. Somebody very carefully chose how to put the angles on here so you could comfortably use it. I mean, you know, sometimes you go to cut the cheese and all you've got is a little bread knife, so you have to push down on the top of the knife, and it's painful. That never happens here, because you have a lovely flat finger rest. And that's beautifully designed, but it doesn't work in your left hand. This is a right-handed tool. This one doesn't work in your left hand. It's a right-handed tool. And Joe will be showing you some of these later, because look at this. There's a stone tool, and you say, that is just a ghastly looking piece. Funny thing is, when you actually throw these are technically known as throwing axes. They've got a technical name, but they mostly land on their point. And you say, look at that ghastly bit of stuff. How could that be a design? Well, the funny thing is, again, when you go to hold this like a discus and you throw it, you see that there? Your hand fits beautifully in there. You see where your thumb goes? Just there. And on this side, let me hold it for you. The finger, there are notches on the edge where your fingers actually fit. This is designed for someone who is right-handed, not for someone who is left-handed. So if you're looking for more evidence of intelligent design, it actually shows in the structure of stone tools. Now, we won't be talking about stone tools today, but most of those are from Australia's Aboriginals. The throwing axe is from Africa, and we find stone tools all over the world, and 85 to 90% of them are right-handed, and the others are left-handed. But then don't be surprised, that's the percentage of people in the world that are right-handed. And you have to think above and beyond the square. How do I make this stone tool useful for somebody who's right-handed? So next time you're looking at stone tools, if you got the opportunity, pick it up and have a check. There is more evidence for intelligent design out there, not just in the fact that the stone tool is right-handed, but in the fact that you're right-handed too. Or there's some people who are left-handed, and there are 10%, up to 10% of stone tools that are also left-handed. But boomerangs to Babel and back again. Well, I've asked Joe and Donny to put our clip up. So if our Origin of Races clip on boomerangs is ready and working, let's have a look at our background research on the boomerangs, not in Australia, but somewhere surprising. Can we play that, please, Donny?
Absolutely. So let me get that up on the screen here, gentlemen. I'll make sure the audio's working. And as I'm getting that, I want to let the audience know I am all caught up on questions, and I appreciate the questions that have come in so far. Some really good ones. Okay, we're going to go on mute, gentlemen. If there's any issues, feel free to unmute Joe and just let me know. But I think everything should be good. So here we go.
When the Spanish left Mexico to explore the Grand Canyon in the early 1500s, the Native American Havasupai Indians had already been there around 500 years. The canyon walls, which fenced in their summer gardens, are covered with Havasupai artwork, and their home has become a famed tourist attraction. But the Havasupai view about how the Grand Canyon formed is far different from what most students learn at school. The Havasupai say, before there were people on earth, there was a good God and an evil God. The good God had a daughter who he wanted to become the mother of all living. The evil God was determined to stop this, so he covered the world with a great flood. The good God hollowed out a big tree and placed his daughter in it. And when the waters flooded the earth, she was safe. Finally, the flood waters went down, the mountain peaks emerged, and the canyon was formed. The hollow log came to rest on the new earth, and the good God's daughter stepped out onto an empty world. The ancestors of the Hopi Indians began to move into these canyons several thousand years ago from Asia. They brought with them the same flood stories. They also carried these throwing sticks or boomerangs. They used them to hunt things, just like the ancient Egyptians. People in India, the first inhabitants of Poland and the Middle East. And the most famous of all was the Australian Aboriginal boomerang. It was the world's first environmentally friendly weapon. You couldn't throw it away because it kept coming back. Each group bought the boomerang from where man originated. But where in Asia was that? And if we all once lived together, then how come we look so different? And why do we speak more than 3,000 different languages? Now that's a boomerang. The claim that North American indigenous stories of the flood and creation were the result of missionaries adding biblical color to traditional Indian tales is easy to prove wrong. Hunters and explorers, such as David Thompson, who penetrated far into Canada long before missionaries arrived, collected this record from Western Cree natives.
After the Creator made all the animals and had made all the first people, he said to Wisagachak, "Take good care of my people and teach them how to live. Do not let the people or animals quarrel with each other." But Wisagachak did not obey the Creator. The Creator warned Wisagachak, "I will take everything away from you if you do not obey." But Wisagachak did not obey and tricked the animals and people. So they fought, and the ground became red with blood. So the Creator sent a great flood and washed the ground clean. The sea came upon the land, and everything was drowned except one otter, one beaver, and one muskrat.
These throwing sticks, which looked like Australian Aboriginal boomerangs, were found in places such as King Tutankhamun's tomb in Egypt. The ancient Egyptians left wall paintings showing how they used their fancy boomerangs to catch birds. Many American Indians hunted animals such as rabbits, equipped only with boomerangs, until the cowboys gave them 6 guns. So, despite the boomerang fame of present-day Australian Aboriginals, their race was only one of many which took boomerangs from Babel. The Aboriginals later migrated down India and across to Australia, where they became acclaimed users of another famed Australian invention, the woomera or spear thrower. But this implement was also well known throughout the ancient world. This museum illustration shows how North American Indians used a spear thrower or woomera in exactly the same fashion as the Australian Aboriginal. Common technology is yet another pointer to a recent common origin, which also shows in the way we speak.
Languages do fall into distinct family groups. Some are obviously variations of each other, such as Indo-European English, French, and German, but others, like the Basque language of northern Spain, shows no relationship with any other language. In fact, comparing Chinese and English, they seem totally unrelated. Languages, on the other hand, seem to have had a sudden and separate origin. They start in a very complex form and are certainly not simplified, such as you might imagine developing out of animal grunts. I would say that the development of language basically fits in with the Tower of Babel story in the Bible.
Very good, John. Let me unmute you, gentlemen.
Good. If you can put me on full screen, please, Donny.
Sure.
Now, can you see me there?
Yes. Yeah.
You can. That's good. I just got to get myself back up. There we are. All right. Now, we hope you enjoyed that rather extended clip. We actually intended to turn it off a bit earlier than that. But you will see one thing. We've been doing research on this all around the globe. And yes, we went to all of these places, interviewed all of these natives, and it's still available on our Origin of the Races trilogy, which you can download, which you can stream, which can be seen on many of our platforms, and I'd encourage you to look at it. We went there, we collected the evidence, and we learned how to throw boomerangs into the Grand Canyon. A marvelous little invention, this returning boomerang. But it led to one other thing, and I'm going to talk just for a brief moment on what led to the next bit, and Joe's going to take it from there, and then we'll have our first question time, because I can see them piling up there. Okay. Now, I was studying, you know, the whole controversial section that deals with giants in the land in those days. And I did a little bit of interesting research because I like to check words. So I thought to myself, why do we use the word giants when there's no measurement of the size of these guys in Genesis chapter 6? So I looked at my good old King James, but giants is not an English word. Giants is borrowed from the Latin, which is borrowed from the Greek gigantes. And I thought, that's interesting. Why? Why do the modern translations use Nephilim, a straight transliteration of the Hebrew, but these guys, 1600, 1700, use gigantes? Okay, the answer is simple. You see, giants as a word is borrowed from ancient Greek, G-I-A. Well, I knew that word. I'm a geologist. Gea, the earth. Gea, but more specifically, the earth goddess. And Gaia is the one who invented, created Uranus, and then she mated with him. And they had big people as offspring, heavenly beings, angelic beings, demonic forces, etc. And you have giants. Now, you can choose that word or not if you like, but I'd recommend you go better off with Nephilim because it's the word that's there. Okay, but then I had a strange thought. I don't know about you, but my mind tends to get excited by funny little things and let off. And I thought, gee, I wonder where G comes from. Now, I realize that makes me weird. Most people don't have thoughts like that, but I decided to pursue G. Now, it was almost like the old Sesame Street. You know, today's letter is G. G for giddy up, G for all those things. So I thought, yeah, that's interesting. Where does G come from? So basically, if we can actually bring my pictures back on, Donny, I'll swap over here and get them up again. Where are we? Right. That's what I found. Ga. Oh, there's the Egyptian there. Ga, with a funny looking pot with a lid on and a bird and a bench stick on the right-hand side. Now, I went hunting far and wide. I got about 20 or 30 web references everywhere from Wikipedia through all the Google sites, through you name it, encyclopedias, and they all basically had a reference to Hebrew and Greek and to Egyptian. Oh, this is the Egyptian one we finally tracked down. But what was fascinating was they all had a reference to, see the curved stick on the right-hand side? Or cut you one step further, You see, Joe's going to talk about Hebrew and Greek, but I already went there, and then we had a big long talk with Joe about dictionaries and words, and the end research is fabulous, and Joe's going to present that part. But you see, I ended up finding that curved stick is usually interpreted as the letter G or Gimel in Greek, related to the letter G or Gamma the letter Gamma in Greek and the letter Gimel in Hebrew. But then I had a thought. Moses was in Egypt first, and Moses was a scholar in Egypt. He was learned in all the ways of the Egyptians. I wonder if he pinched the letter from the Egyptian people, and in reality, that's the conclusion I've reached. So Joe and I went hunting for this letter G, because it does turn out all the Hebrew books, all the books on hieroglyphics rather, tell you that curved stick is not a camel's neck, the popular interpretation with a head on it. It turns out to be a boomerang. Now, Joe, you might want to take it from there, because you had a lot more access to some of these university books. They're old university books, hieroglyphic dictionaries that most of us can't access. So I'm going to let you take it from there, because there is our theme. Moses, the New Testament says, was learned in all the wisdom of the Egyptians. He could read the hieroglyphs, even if you and I couldn't. Wow. Joe, take it away with your PowerPoints, please.
Right, Joel. Well, before I go over to PowerPoints very briefly, I just want to show you, because as you can see, we've got a whole research room full of all sorts of books, and we've been rather blessed over the years to receive a whole series of research opportunities and research books. And yes, this was the one that John held up a minute ago, Volume 1 and Volume 2, right? The Egyptian Hieroglyphic Dictionary, but it's not by any means the only one. Perhaps the most authoritative one is the Allen Middle Egyptian book, which I have just here with me. And right at the back, there's actually a sign list, and it's all of your, hieroglyphs with the meanings behind them, but not just the meanings, because you've got to remember hieroglyphs is not just a pictorial language, it's also a grammatical language. In other words, a bird doesn't always mean a bird, right? A bird can tell you which way to read your hieroglyphs. A bird paired with something else can mean something else entirely. So not only is it a pictorial thing, it actually has issues with grammar, or has connections rather to grammar, to the way that it's put together, to the way that you understand and read hieroglyphs. But the sign list is quite interesting, because it actually tells you the origins of the signs behind them. So this is a bird, or this is a so and so forth, a cloth, or a sickle, or whatever. And in the sign list, so this is basically his sign list, one of the most authoritative sign lists. On page 497, you have warfare, hunting, and slaughter. And just down towards the bottom, at T14, you actually have that same Gimel sign. And it is what is the description? A throw stick, often used paired with the bird. Why? Because paired with the bird, you have hunting. Because what would you use your throw stick for? The same one, or the same thing that the Australian Aborigines would have used it for, which was for hunting, particularly for birds. Now, we have more examples of this, particularly in the connection of, is this Gimel sign a camel's neck, or is it a throwing stick? But we'll dig down a little bit deeper into that. But for now, I'm just going to pull my screen up, because we're going to have a look at the Boomerangs to Babel program. There it is there. On the top right, you can see that Gimel sign. On the bottom left, you can see some of the boomerangs that Creation Research has in its collection over in Australia, including the one at the bottom, which is actually a non-returning boomerang. In fact, only a tiny percentage, comparatively, of the Aborigines had the famed returning boomerang. Most of them didn't. They were used for a different purpose. In fact, the one down the bottom is not just a non-returning boomerang. It's actually a killing boomerang, known as a Kali. Now, there's interesting connections to Kali because, well, that's the Indian goddess of death, the Hindu goddess of death. So you've actually got a little sneak peek as to where the Australian Aborigines first came from, and it's not very popular, especially if you want to try and claim that the Australian Aboriginals have been around for 70,000 years. But all the evidence, linguistically, culturally, and genetically, actually puts them coming originally from India. So interesting stuff. Okay, in English, what do? You learn your ABCs. In fact, if you actually look up, it's interesting studying grammar, and it's interesting studying language, because in our heads, you have A, B, C, the letters, right? But they actually have an official spelling as well, and you can see it there. It is literally A, B as in B-double-E, C as in C-double-E. That's what you learn when you go to school. You learn your ABCs. And of course, if you're in your Greek, you don't learn ABC, you learn alpha, beta, gamma. And in your Paleo-Hebrew, that's your old Hebrew, you learn your Alph, Bet, Gimel. Those are the first three words. Interesting, the kind of stuff he's in. I mean, you notice alphabet. I mean, that sounds, there's a connection there, not just between alpha and bet, but also to the Greek alpha beta or alpha beta, and obviously to our English name alphabet. It's amazing and mind-blowing as you dig into linguistics, the way that words are actually connected across cultures. In fact, we saw a tiny little snippet of Professor Alan Hall give a little mention of that in the little clip we showed earlier. And there's actually your letters, right? Capital letters, A, little lowercase a, capital B, lowercase b, capital C, lowercase c. And then you've got your Greek, A in the English, and then you've got your, well, actually, they're pretty similar, aren't they, in the Greek? You've got a funny little tail to the B, but then it goes a little bit strange with your gamma. I mean, we've got a little stick-like thing, but it's actually similar to what's going on in the Paleo-Hebrew. The only difference is it's the other way round. I mean, there's your gamma highlighted with your gimel, and you can see the two symbols that are used in both the Greek and in the Paleo-Hebrew, and they're pretty similar except for one thing, they're switched around the other way. Now, that's not too surprising, because if you know your Hebrew, you know that, you don't read from left to right in Hebrew, you read from right to left. In your Greek, you read from left to right, just like you do in your English. So don't be surprised that the letters sometimes get switched over when you change the direction that you're actually reading it in. All right, alpha, beta, gamma, A, B, C. You see, our A, B, and C has been borrowed from the Greeks, or there's A and the B, certainly. Alpha, beta, gamma has come from the Hebrew. You can actually see that with the alph, bet, and gimel. There are connections. But where did this Hebrew come from? Particularly the G, the gimel. What's the connection between these? There it is there. It's the ancient Egyptians. See, we're going to delve into not just Egyptian language, but also boomerangs and all sorts of amazing things. And remember our key point. It was Moses who was learned in the way of the Egyptians. He was highly educated. He was a prince of Egypt. Here it is here, Acts chapter 7. And at this time, Moses was born and was well-pleasing to God, and he was brought up in his father's house for 3 months. But when he was set out, Pharaoh's daughter took him away and brought him up as her own son. And Moses was learned in all the wisdom of the Egyptians and was mighty in words and deed. He went to the best university in Egypt, or the equivalent of a university. He was trained in the highest standard, and he was a prince of Egypt, given the best options for what he needed to learn and do. Moses was trained by the Egyptians. He learned Egyptian language and writing. The prince of Egypt, heavily influential after 40 years, and you know that because Moses comes back from 40 years in the wilderness and he walks straight up to Pharaoh. Now, Pharaoh's considered a god. You have to be pretty important if you can walk straight up to a god, even up to Egyptian standards. So he was heavily influential even after 40 years of spending time in the desert. And you'll find that these Egyptian pictorial writing and symbolic meanings are connected to sounds this present day. Case in point, the S. I mean, you think of dinosaurs. Yes, dinosaurs have a connection to Egyptian as well, because it's the old S shaped like a snake, which is where we get the main saurus from, the S. It moves in its body like an S shape, right? Snake, saurus, all connected. So even Egyptians and dinosaurs have something to do with each other. And the ancient Hebrew, that's our pre-600 BC, the Paleo-Hebrew, Greek, and Phoenician letter for the G, that Gimel or Gamma, are all connected to each other, and they're all connected to ancient Egyptian. Well, let's take a momentary break from the old Egyptian and delve into boomerangs, because there is a real strong connection here, and we need to get that big picture of boomerangs, because you'll often find a common claim is that boomerangs, as in the throwing stick, right, are indigenous to Australia, having been invented by the Aussie Aborigines. What's the reality? Well, creation research is well known for its programs on boomerangs. John's been speaking on it for many years, and you'll find them in both of the Origin of Races and the Real Roots programs that we've done. You'll find that ancient boomerangs have been found in Holland, Scandinavia, Denmark, Switzerland, Poland, Germany, Greece, Egypt, India, Indonesia, Africa, South America, USA, and of course, most famously in Australia. Now, that's a lot of countries. That's a rather wide-ranging amount of countries as well. You want the evidence? There's a whole selection of them from all over the world. Places like Poland, Africa, Germany, Australia most famously, Egypt, United States, and, well, here's our Indian ones. Very similar to the Australian Aborigines. There's the Australian ones. In the USA and Arizona, you can see them carrying a boomerang, having just hunted a rabbit with it. The old ancient boomerangs in Poland, reported on in Nature, very prestigious journal. This isn't hidden away somewhere. These are prestigious reports. The ancient Egyptian boomerangs as well. Now we're getting back to Egypt again. Yeah, Egyptians had boomerangs, no doubt about it. You can actually see the, creation research. John Mackay went to the big Tutankhamun exhibition a few years back in the British Museum, got permission to go and film all of this, paid top dollar for it as well, but it was well worth it, because look, there's your curved throwing stick, there's your bent boomerang throwing stick, and down below you can actually see Egyptian pictures and hieroglyphs depicting, what are they hunting? Birds. But then don't be surprised, because Allen's Middle Egyptian actually said that the bird and the throwing stick actually went together quite closely. Interesting. Whole collections of all sorts of throwing sticks, including non-returning ones. Interesting. There's your bent stick as shown in the Egyptian hieroglyphs. There's your, or funny wavy stick. There's your normal looking boomerang. There's your bent one in the pictures. In fact, this is an original painting, original hieroglyphic painting that is still in the British Museum today. You can go and see it there, and you can see the Egyptians using throwing sticks, including perhaps most famously the one found in Tutankhamun's tomb, the one that John went to actually go and film. You see, the reality is these boomerangs have been found and have been used all over the world. I mean, look at what the chap in the middle is carrying in his right hand. It's another throwing stick. In fact, they actually report it as such in the museums as well. They're used as weapons of war. They're used as hunting. They're used for everything that you'd use a boomerang for. And now we get back to the language. The old ancient Egyptian symbol for the throwing stick, which is also part of the ancient Egyptian G or J, they're used synonymously. And you can go through all of the literature. Gimel equals a pictorial symbol of a throwing stick facing left. In all of the Egyptian dictionaries, you can actually go for and look. By the way, we've cross-referenced it, not just with Allen's Middle Egyptian, not just with the main, you can see it in the back here, throwing stick in the Egyptian hieroglyph sign lists for exercises, but also in from the University of Toronto, the study of ancient hieroglyphs by Mercer. You find all of this cross-referenced. There's no doubt about it. The ancient Egyptian G or J Gimel is a throwing stick. I mean, it's not surprising. It even looks like one, right? Well, let's follow this through and double check. There's those books I held up earlier, an Egyptian hieroglyphic dictionary. Just for all you doubters out there that think that it's the more common or modern idea of it being a bent camel neck, you can actually check the list of hieroglyphic characters and what each one represents. You can see we're down in XIX, right? Weapons and arms. There's the bent stick, the two depictions of it. And what does it call it there? A boomerang. In fact, this is going one step further than just calling it a throwing stick. It's a boomerang. It means to throw. There's an interesting reference to foreign nations as well, and there's some interesting linguistic connections, which I was just chatting to John about just before this program. So there's our next research point, right, to actually go and look into that. But boomerang it is for sure. No doubt about it. There it is, plain as day. Boomerang. Okay, well, there's the Paleo-Hebrew alphabet. I'll bear in mind, by the way, that you're actually reading this right to left, same as modern Hebrew. It's not going the other way, right? And you can see you've got your, on the far right-hand side, you've got your alf sign, then you've got your bet sign, then you've got your, hey, that looks like that Egyptian throwing stick. In fact, it's the Gimel. It's the same name as the Egyptian letter as well. Interesting. There it is there. Gimel. Okay, Gimel, it's related to your Egyptian pictorial symbol of a throwing stick. It also faces left. It's the same letter. In fact, the ancient Greek G is pretty similar. It's just been switched around. It's now facing to the right. It's an Egyptian pictorial symbol, but for sure, the same symbol of the throwing stick, but it's been switched around so it's facing right. And don't be surprised, because somewhere down the line, and we don't know where, it's a mystery really to ancient linguistics, but somewhere down the line, the ancient Greeks started reading it the other way around to the Hebrews. In fact, the ancient Egyptians, you could read it right, you could read it left, you could read it up, you could read it down. It all depended which way the animals are facing. So you don't be surprised that the letter's been flipped around. But there's your ancient Hebrew, and there's your ancient Egyptian symbol for Gimel. Pretty much identical, and these are from the official sources, by the way. They're both named Gimel, and they're both depicting a throwing stick. See, Egyptian boomerangs. In fact, you can go one step further with the Egyptian history and find that Egyptians actually had separate meanings for whether they had returning or non-returning boomerangs. Because often a boomerang, if it wasn't paired with a bird, it could be paired with a single crown or a double crown. And a single crown meant a non-returning boomerang. You throw it and it stayed there, whether to kill something or whether to be caught by somebody else. If it had a double crown associated with it, it was a returning boomerang. And it's amazing what you can dig in and find when you actually have the research and literature to look from. You see, the old claim is that the Greeks borrowed from the Hebrews, who borrowed from the Venetians, but this view is slowly being abandoned now because of this kind of research. Well, what's the Babel connection in all of this before we hand back to John? You see, the Hebrews came from Babel. No doubt about it, they're the descendants of Peleg. It was in the days of Peleg that the earth was divided, as in the people groups were divided at the Tower of Babel. And the Egyptians came from Babel as well, but they were descendants of Ham. They were the Hamites. Ham, of course, being one of the sons of Noah. You see your Ham, which is a name that means burnt, black, dark. Cush is a descendant of Ham, and the Cushites are depicted as being black people in Egyptian tombs. Again, don't be surprised when you actually find that what we see in archaeology and history actually matches up with what we read in the Bible. You see, the real point? Australian Aborigines did not invent boomerangs. They're merely the last people using them. Boomerangs are found all over the world. They're found used by all different people from all over the world, not just the ancient Egyptians, but also as far over as North and South America, up into Poland and Europe, down into Africa. And what's interesting is that, well, we don't know this yet. This is now speculation, but the Egyptian boomerang symbol could also be meant for foreign nations, but it was also connected, and this is the official in our Egyptian hieroglyph study book, where you have the sign list, it could also mean the old word Negro, which I know is now a politically incorrect term, but it's actually still used in the scientific literature as in meaning black. And so there's a really interesting potential connection here into going down and looking into who actually first introduced the throwing sticks to the Egyptians. Could it have been the Cushites? Who knows? Well, another little bit of research that we need to go into, but the reality is the boomerang, or the throwing stick, has linguistic connections to many languages, including ancient Greek, and you can actually trace this down, by the way, because you can see a whole chart of how the old ancient Egyptian Gimel became the ancient Hebrew G for Gimel, down into the Greek Gamma, and all the way down into our modern day G sign. It's a fascinating history. But the big picture, if you want it, is that God made all nations from one man. Now, nothing to be with these old ancient hominids or less evolved people or anything like that. God made all nations from one man, the Bible says, that one man being Adam. And he made all nations from this one man for them to live on the earth at the times and the places that he appointed. Why? So that they would seek the Lord. So make sure when you're using your boomerangs or you're talking about your ancient Egyptians, you realize the big picture of the gospel through all of this, because it all points back to the fact that we all come from one people. The fact that we all use boomerangs around the world, the fact that even our modern English G is related to an ancient Paleo-Hebrew word is amazing, and it just goes to show that we're all related to them in some way. And it was because of God's judgment in the Tower of Babel that we went our separate ways and our languages changed and the way that it all culture changed, but it all goes back to this big purpose that God made all nations from one man, and he put them to live on the earth at the times and the places they he appointed so that they would seek the Lord. Acts chapter 17. John, back to you.
Let's go back to both of us, because you've said a lot, Joe. I've shown a lot. It's been very exciting. It's probably time for questions. And Donny wants plenty of questions and plenty of time there. So noticed your little note there, Donny. How's your voice holding up, mate?
It's handling pretty good. Well, maybe. Lots of water here. So
that's good. Okay, so we'll take questions now for the next little while, and then if we have time, we'll round this off. But I've enjoyed today. I've certainly enjoyed doing the background research along with Joe and his files there. It's just been very exciting. So, okay, what do you want to do question-wise, Donny?
Well, firstly, excellent job as always, gentlemen. I think George Bond sums it up perfectly here. He says, now that's what I call in-depth research. And so Joe and John, you both are incredibly important to the Young Earth creation cause. You're both, your team is doing some of the best real-time experiments in the world, I would argue. And so we do have a couple questions regarding the experiments that you've presented on here, you've presented on over on your channel. Also, I do have to say, I love the 24/7 live streaming you brothers are doing over on the Creation Research. It helps me greatly. I'm working, listening to you guys all day. So keep up the great work. Okay, so first question comes in from Tanya Brown. Do their experiments making coal, oil, shale, and limestone produce products identical to those found in the ground?
Okay, the answer is undeniably so. It's really got the old Earth geologists puzzled, because we have on our website, our current website, which is currently being upgraded, but you can still access the current one. Just go to Exciting Research and then look up coal, clay, any of those words. There's a couple of search engines there, and you will see some of the experiments that produce methane. Now, the methane produced by our first of experiments, where we just simply have the clay and we have the vegetation inside it, and then we just sort of vacuum pack it. As I said, that means the maximum pressure on it is the weight of the atmosphere. So it's not a huge amount of pressure, no more than what's pressing on your lungs or whatever. But what you notice fairly soon is the bag begins to swell. Certain products make more methane gas than others, and you can see them listed there. If you want to do the experiments, we'd encourage people to actually copy the experiments and report back to us what you get. But the most fascinating thing is, by using the kaolin clay, fairly commonly available, go to a pottery shop and ask for kaolin clay. Out here in Australia, you can either buy it as a powder, which is the cheapest way. It's a bit of a pain to have to make it up, and it's like making up old-fashioned medicine, and you've got to get rid of the lumps and all of that. But when you get it made up, or you can buy it as potter's clay in blocks, maybe 20-kilo blocks, and then slice a section off, put your fossils in it, vacuum pack it. Ordinary kitchen vacuum pack will work. And if it swells up, then you can guarantee that it will be methane and pure methane. And I know that because you see most organic compounds that break down long chain hydrocarbons will actually produce smells, right? And if you try to burn that methane, it will burn, but boy, do you have to remove yourself at quite a distance. But all of our methane is the same high quality that comes out of the ground as pure methane. So you get a beautiful blue flame, you get lots of heat, you get absolutely no stink whatsoever. For those of you who want to know what the stink is, usually it's a sulfur compound. Sulfur makes some incredible smells. You notice that when you produce it as well. You do produce methane, by the way, in your digestion, but don't light the other end where it comes out. It's a party trick by stupid boys, but it is there. But so are a lot of the sulfur smells, and you know that to your embarrassment usually. So what you'll find is when you make the methane this way, it actually produces pure methane. So point number one, we've actually told the people, the industrial people, we can make methane without any heat at all. All we need is the clay and the bag and the vacuum packer. And I thought we would have been, yay, that's really great. And people said, you're inventing more pollution for the atmosphere. Oh, this is a green world gone mad. There's exactly the same amount of methane in the plant when it was alive that we've broken off in the plant now that it's dead. So we haven't increased the carbon content of the world at all. We started with the carbon that's here. We produce methane usable, and we do it with a very low heat budget. The same turns out to be true for the coal. It's been quite hilarious. You can look up the coal experiments on our experimental research or exciting results. Go and click on that, and you will see us making coal. And you say, how could you prove it's coal? Well, we've been challenged many times on this, and we've done many sorts of tests, pondering, now. We used to lecture in coal geology, have given papers at coal conferences, and very rarely do the people involved in coal actually quiz the tests we've done. Because we actually told one serious skeptic, how do you know this is coal and you're not just burning a black leaf or black leaf compounds? And we said, because when you burn it, it smells like coal. And they went, ho, 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 that's not a test. Well, I grew up with a coal stove. I grew up with steam trains, the old ones that puff out the top. They're much more exciting than diesels or electric. And you could tell the coal smell. It's got a very bitumen rich, full of organic compounds, and it's very distinct. It's also, they discovered ages ago, very useful when you've got your stuffy nose. You ought to take some. We actually do. You actually use it in many of the compounds you put on yourself when you're getting rid of all your flus and that. And that guy, he just laughed silly that we were so stupid we'd believe that a simple test like that would prove it was coal. So I said, I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll write to one of the world's leading biochemists and asked him, if you had to test for coal, what would you do? And back came the report from this university professor. He said, that's simple. You burn it, and if it smells like coal, it's coal, because coal's got an absolutely unique smell. And all of us who grew up with coal burning fires before they were sort of banned know what that smell is. It belongs to nothing else. So we have made genuine coal. We have proved it beyond a shadow of a doubt. The only one we're having difficulty at the moment with is oil. Now, we know we can make it. It can come out of plants. There are some plants that are very rich in oils, the pine trees and things like that will produce oily compounds, but the ones that really work well are things like mullet fish or prawns. They really do. You start the experiment and within a day or two, it starts to go greasy black inside. But when you try to extract it, you find it's almost impossible to extract from the clay. We've even had centrifuges spinning at 20,000 revs per minute trying to separate the oil from the clay. And we have pretty well failed miserably. And then when I thought about it, hey, that's why when we have an oil spill on a big ship, watch the reports next time this happens. It's a bit of a almost environmental tragedy, although it's totally organic, so it will disappear regardless. One of the things we do to clean it up is throw kaolin clay on it, because the kaolin clay absorbs it so strongly, it'll remove it totally from the environment. And then the bacteria will slowly turn it back into normal organic compounds that are in the environment. And if you think they can't clean it up totally, you have been led astray by the green movement. Go to oil springs, the first place in the world where they actually drill for oil. No, it's not in America, it's in Canada. Pat yourself on the back, Donny. The Canadians invented oil drilling, not the Texans. So basically, you've got Oil Springs, Canada, where they had a big manual. I mean, there were guys pushing big levers around, drilling manually down. And then when it blew, the well actually blew. There was so much pressure there. The oil was flowing down the creek 3 meters deep, Nelly, right? And totally out of control. And there's not a trace of it now, because oil is organic, and oil, the bacteria will eat the oil. And that's a problem you have sometimes in your big diesel trucks. If you get bacteria in your fuel tank, you will have a gooey problem. So it is organic compound. So don't let the rabid greens lead you astray from using that stuff. And most of the oil we're coming and the methane and that comes from originally just the fossils, and they are the byproducts of what comes off when you actually produce just the carbon chains in coal or fossils. So yes, you can do this. Yes, we have proved it. We still have trouble trying to extract the oil, even though you can prove it's oil by using spectrographs and things like that. The oil is there, but I don't see us ever coming up with a way at the moment of getting the oil commercially. Even though we can make the methane commercially, we can make the coal not commercially yet, because it's still cheaper to dig it out of the ground. So Donny, and you want to say anything else, Joe?
Just very briefly on the shale kind of stuff, you can go again to creationresearch.net, click on research, but you can see where at Jurassic Ark, which has Jurassic rocks in it, it's what it's named after, and the Jurassic rocks have layers and layers of light rock, layers of dark rock. It's a type of sandstone mixed with lime there. And what I know that you did, John, along with a couple of other researchers, is go, well, these strata machines are all well and good and they have spectacular results, but what happens if we take actual real life sediment instead of artificially produced or collected from different places around the world? And you took me over to different islands to collect sands and stuff to put through the strata machine. What happens if we actually take rock, turn it back into its original sediment, put it into the strata machine? What's it going to produce, right? Real life testing. So get a nice great big chunk of this rock, okay? Jurassic rock has layers of light, has layers of dark, and you crash and smash it all up back into the original sediment. Pour that sediment through a strata machine, and it produces layers of light and layers of dark, which match up beautifully with the original rock specimen as well. So yes, you can actually do tests with these machines. Yes, sometimes you're going to need to do them under controlled environments, right, with controlled substances to make sure that it's all kind of tested right. But when you apply it to the real world, you'll find that it matches up beautifully, whether it's coal, oil, or strata as well. So there you go.
Yeah, thanks, Joe. I will just make one comment on that, because we've had a few geologists from the mines department that come and say, oh, that's just a toy. We've even had some of the creation groups say, oh, that's just a little toy that you can mimic anything on. And we do have to remind people as to what the principle going on here that would have applied to Noah's flood or the smallest strata machine we made, which was 18 inches, half a meter long. And that is the thing that we noticed was whether it was half a meter or a meter and a half or 2 meters or 3 meters, we ended up with the same results. And when we checked with the water engineers, they said, that's because your results are not coming from the shape of your machine. They're coming because all you're using is water and the properties of the water are identical. And I said, well, what do you mean? They said, well, water runs in layers. Water already has layers in it. And it's those layers that separate out the strata right from the beginning. That's why they can take a rock that you busted up into its finest particles and they will put it back into layers just like that. So as Joe said, go to Creation Research, click on Exciting Experiments or Strata Machine, have a look at the actual experiments and then copy them yourselves. The more people who do this, the better it will be all around the globe, and the more you'll bang people on the head for saying, oh, that's just a toy. No, this is how Noah's flood would have worked, but on a big scale, just like our pipes work on a little scale or a strata machine on somewhere in between. So great question. Thanks for all of that. And go to those places where Joe said if you want to donate, because all of these experiments actually do cost money and time. So Donny, what's your next question?
That's great, gentlemen. You are both just walking encyclopedias, and you do an excellent job addressing the critics of these real-time experiments validating the Genesis flood. So a quick follow-up question. So when these critics, some of the most militant critics, will say the young earth creation model could never explain all of the coal, oil, natural gas, limestone, for example, in just 4,500 years, your real-time strata experiments have demonstrated that no, all of this can be formed rapidly under the right conditions.
Yeah, and not only rapid formation. I remember Professor Ian Plimer, who surprisingly is totally anti-climate change. You know, climate changes who want to say human-induced stuff. He's totally against that sort of philosophy, so good on him. But at the same time, he still wants millions of years. And he made the comment that, you know, how could you actually produce coal on a global scale? He said you'd need at least 3 or 4 massive floods. Right. And I had to remind him of one thing. Not only does the Bible say God created, not only does it say sin came in as a fact, not only does it say there was a judgment called the flood, or that all of our ancestors were at Babel, where they were probably already throwing boomerangs, which show in your Bible in the letter G or in the Gimel or whatever it is, right? But what you find is it describes the actual physical world. God gathered the waters into one place. So before Noah's flood, there was not 7 major oceans. The water was all in one place and the land was in the other. And when I spoke to one Hebrew expert, when it says, you know, and God gathered the waters into one place, if you have a round globe, the only way that can occur is if the water is actually smaller than the land. So the land is actually around the water, so the water is in one place. Otherwise, you'd have the land in one place and the ocean would surround it, which means, of course, that the land would have been at least 75% of the global surface in one spot. Now, think carefully. No summer, no winter, no drought, no fires, none of that thing. So by the time you get to Noah's flood, the vegetation that is now up to 1,600 years old, the trees must have been magnificent, right? And the bark layers on them would have been incredible. And then you have that world destroyed. And as Peter says, the world was cataclysmos. It wasn't just your feet got your feet wet, had to climb the highest hill, get in a boat and sail around for 40 days and 40 nights. The world was cataclysmos. So all of that carbon potential on a world which is now, well, come on, the present world is 75% water and 25% land, and only about a third of that is viable, arable stuff where the trees will grow. So poor old Professor Plimer, stuck in his Lyellian, the present is the key to the past, you will find it fails. Because if you want to have a model of Noah's flood, you need a globe where it's 3/4 land, covered with lush forests, and one flood will produce enough coal compared to 4 floods on the present day planet. So take all the data into consideration and not just the strata machine or how quickly we can make it. It's a question of volume too. Thanks, Donny.
Excellent. Love it. It's great. Okay, real quick, George Bond, appreciate it, brother. He says subscribe to the CR YouTube channel to get all the latest experiments. I highly recommend it. He's got the link posted there for people to check out. So the next question here comes in from Born Again RN, and he asks, excuse me, can you address living fossils and how they refute these fossils being millions of years old and why they have not evolved?
Joe?
All right, a couple of things. If you're going to look for evidence of evolution, you need to look for it in the rocks, because even if you can prove that things can evolve today, that doesn't prove objectively that that's how they did it. And so really what you need to be looking at is a history of life on Earth, which shows organisms evolving. Of course, to do that, you have to have a geological column, which is representative of age from youngest to oldest. And we've done several programs on the geological column on Standing for Truth, really showing you that you can't trust it as a history of time. Therefore, any kind of argument you make out of it from simple creatures going to older creatures just fall down. But the benefit of living fossils, it really backs up the reality that you and I and all life is designed to not evolve. All right, we are designed to not evolve, because for the very simple reason, 10 times in Genesis chapter 1, God says that he created living creatures after their kind and to reproduce after their kind. So don't be surprised that when you go down into your DNA, there's a self-checking mechanism which is deliberately there to stop mutations from happening. Now, we live in a fallen world, and the reality is mutations do happen, but they are virtually all bad. The only time they're ever good is if it's a result of circumstantially beneficial, but 100% of the time, no doubt about it, they are all the result of a loss of information. So yes, you do get some change in the fossil record. Case in point, these lovely ginkgo leaves. They used to have great big fronds. Nowadays, they just have 2 lobes. They've changed for sure, but they've gone downhill. They haven't gone uphill. So point number 1, we're designed to not evolve. Our DNA is designed to not change. That shouldn't be surprising, because God created us and all living things to reproduce after their kind. Number 2, even if you do see change in the fossil record, i.e. the ginkgos, number 1, they're still ginkgos, even by secular standards. Number 2, it's a downhill spiral. If they keep going that way, they'll be extinct. In fact, they nearly were extinct if it wasn't for the old Buddhist monks who actually looked after them in China, right? They almost certainly would have been extinct by now. Okay, so third point with living fossils, all they do is show that it doesn't matter how old you make the rocks, whether you want to believe the rocks are 175 million years old, like secular geologists believe the rocks at Whitby are, or if you want to believe they're 159 million years old, like the fossil dragonfly, or the oldest living fossils, supposedly, are 3.7 billion years old. They're the stromatolites. They're still alive today off the coast of Western Australia. So it doesn't matter how old you want to make the rocks. The only evidence you can find in them is that for as long as creatures have been around, they've done exactly what God told them to do 10 times in Genesis chapter 1, which is reproduce after their own kind. In fact, John, Living Fossils was the first ever video production that Creation Research produced.
It really was, and I believe it's available on our 24/7, or they can download it or stream it. All of those things are available. But since you brought up the ginkgos again, I do have to remind you, Joe, that the world's biggest fossil ginkgos, they happen to be in Australia, of course, a little bit further north of where I am at the moment, and they're that big. And you'll find that the reason why ginkgo is called a living fossil, it's actually the first recognized living fossil. The name was invented by Charles Darwin, and he was living at a time where the local cities were actually planting ginkgo trees as in the bigger towns, London, etc. And they were a very nice tree, just leaves about that big and split into 2 lobes. And they were a very nice tree. They did well in England. They'd actually been in England for quite a while, because as Joe said, it's thanks to the folks in China, some of the Buddhist monks, etc., who'd actually preserved some of these. But the missionaries, the Christian missionaries, were the ones who came across them when they visited China and brought some back. So beginning 1700s, you're getting interaction of the the ginkgo trees coming back to England, being eventually planted. And so when Charles Darwin, whose friend Lyell was into fossils as well as some of the others, you're in Yorkshire and you have rocks and rocks full of these ginkgo leaves, they recognize them straight away. And hence the term living fossils. And the key point is the same point Charles Darwin made. The fossils are the worst part of my theory. Right now, don't let that out of your mind. The fossils don't help evolution. Even if you make them millions of years old, the fossils, as Charles Darwin recognized, were the worst part of his theory. Ginkgos become ginkgos, and they used to be this big. Again, I'll remind you, it's in Australia, Joe. Up near Lee Creek, you'll find gigantic fossil ginkgos. Yeah, I know you haven't. And today they're down to that big, and they don't grow very well in Australia at all, except down in the southern colder climates like in England. So again, loss is the key feature, loss of size, loss of fragments, but again, devolution, not evolution. So again, look at our fact file, look at the Q&A site, search for living fossils, and you'll be amazed because actually everything on the planet at the moment is some kind of living fossil, Donny included.
Very true. Excellent answer as always. The last presentation you gentlemen did with us was on degeneration, extinction, and devolution. So I recommend people check that out. Okay, next question comes in. Another common criticism or challenge from the evolutionist camp. So the question is, how can the flood model explain places like Specimen Ridge, where there are multiple layers of fossilized forests and volcanic ash layers alternating on top of each other?
Okay, well, I'd recommend that you go to our website again, go searching for polystrate trees, because if you are allowed to dig at Specimen Ridge these days, which I doubt, you will find that the polystrate trees all around the globe are pretty well characterized, and I've dug them up from Alaska. I've dug them up from right across Canada through Nova Scotia, where they first enter the literature, right across through England, where they've been known for centuries but not recognized as such, across into Asia and Europe, down into Australia. So we have the world's biggest track record of excavating these things. Now, I'll be honest, it's good exercise, absolutely boring, because what you find is when you get down to the base, even if you find what you call a root base, you will find that when you get to the end, the roots are snapped off. At Jurassic Ark, we have quite a large number of trees, fossil trees, 10,000 fossil trees. And some of them are polystrate, meaning they cross the strata. But we have one lovely big root base, and every root is snapped off. We have a huge tree, which is, well, not polystrate in the sense of going through the strata like that, but because it's yay thick, it's polystrate anyway, right? It crosses multiple layers. And in fact, if you really want to talk about it, every fossil thicker than 1 grain of sand is a polystrate fossil. But whether we're in Alaska, and they're on our website, or whether we're in England, and Joe can talk about some more of those in a moment, what you'll find is the fossils didn't grow where you find them. And that is particularly true whether you're talking about Specimen Ridge or whether you're talking about the fossils down in the Arizona State Forest. They did not grow where you currently find them. They grew somewhere else. So go and have a close look at Specimen Ridge, and you'll find they're vertical for sure, many of them. And they did not grow in a soil that's there at all. Joe, take over.
Yeah, I mean, you find these polystrate trees all over the world. I think that's would be something for like a subject of one of our next documentaries, is to travel the world looking at polystrate trees. And in January, I'm coming back to the USA again. And in February, we're going to be organizing a trip with David Reeves, our good friend David Reeves over there, to actually go to a polystrate tree site that John found a number of years back, and there's some spectacular stuff there. So you can trace these polystrate trees all around the world. They're often there in the Carboniferous, but they're found all the way up into You go all the way up into the Permian and into the Jurassic and so on and so forth. When you give multiple layers of these fossil forests and volcanic ash, again, the reminder that John made that you can't use modern day examples of swamps and so on and so forth to try and explain it. You've actually got to take a step back and go, well, we're dealing with a worldwide pretty much deposit. That was the point that Professor Derek Ager made, right? These deposits go all around the world. And you're also dealing with, well, you actually took me to a place in Tennessee where we could trace volcanic ash layers running across. So it's really not surprising in a global flood that you would have volcanic ash. I mean, we've got entire continents that are ripping up and stuff that's being pressurized and pouring out into the upper atmosphere. Well, that ash has got to come down at some point, and you'll find that when you actually have hot ash like this hit cold water, you end up with it solidifying, and you can actually map this all the way across entire continents sometimes, these ash layers. So I wouldn't really be surprised. But one of the key points that John made, and I think it really is stressed, that if you want to criticize places like Specimen Ridge or some of the big polystrate places, go and actually do some digging there yourself if you're allowed to, or at least go and actually see it, because one of the things I'll always be grateful for is that the Lord's enabled me to travel around the world and see some of this stuff, and John's traveled way more than I have, and he's got a lot more experience than me. So when you actually travel and go and see these places, and you can actually say, well, hey, I've seen this before, it's over on this side of the continent and over on that side of the world, it really helps in matching stuff up.
I'll just add one more little field trip. I was blessed by being in the USA shortly after Mount St. Helens blew up. I was actually in Nova Scotia when it did blow up, and we even got the ash over there. It made the water go murky fairly quickly. But having gone back to the other side, and you'll find that there are recent polystrate trees there. And we know how recent because they were growing in forests. The day before Mount St. Helens blew up, and then they were scattered everywhere from the water, right, where they floated for ages. And one of my colleagues, one of our creation research colleagues, was on some of the first research teams that were there and photographed all of this. And we have his photographs on our website showing the trees progressively sinking because their bases become heavier. That's where they normally soak water in. Then they sink down, and there they are standing on the bottom, vertical. ICR did some wonderful work at that time as well. And what you'll find is we've duplicated those in the experiment showing how you can end up with vertical fossil logs. We've got a polystrate tank in which we can put logs and they end up vertical. And then when they're totally saturated, they will actually fall down with their root base up. But meanwhile, it looks like they grew there, and we know they didn't because a few days early we just placed them on the top. But if you go to Mount St. Helens, you will find many of the trees sitting in Tootle Creek or Tuttle Creek, depending on how you want to pronounce it, weren't there one day. They were there the next day, and here they are standing on their bases, upright, smashed off. Now, I've visited this place many, many times since Mount St. Helens eruption, and I know there were no trees growing in the middle of the Toutle River bottom there, right? They were there one day, they weren't there the day before, and they're still weathering out of the sides of the volcanic ash beds that were laid down in a very, very short period of time. And what I found also was most amazing when I researched all the layers of volcanic ash at Mount St. Helens and way up into Mount Rainier, etc., and all the way up through Washington State, because I love getting outside and climbing these places and digging. What you'll find is there are perfectly preserved petrified trees at Mount St. Helens, but they're from the previous eruption, which wasn't all that long ago, right? And the tree is standing upright and it's turned to stone, and these are vertical, and it's totally in volcanic ash. We know it didn't grow there. It's got roots ripped up. There's your clue. No soil, no whole root system. So go and have a check these places yourselves. Do a bit of climbing. It's worth the effort, because the standard story is borrowed from Charles Lyell, who borrowed it from the earlier skeptics. And here's what their logic is. Only the things that happen in the present are allowed to be used as an explanation. Their logic: no Moses at all, please. Or as modern science curriculums say, our rule is science is the naturalistic explanation without reference to God. Now, if you don't allow God and you don't allow his word, you are absolutely prejudiced, right? You're not open-minded. You're not being scientific. You are absolutely prejudiced. So put the flood into it, put the catastrophes in it, and what you find is those trees standing upright, hey, they don't fit long, slow deposition at all. That's just the popular paradigm. So God bless Professor Plimer and co., but they need to abandon their atheistic position on science. Okay, Donny, next one.
Right. Amen. Great work, gentlemen. No evolutionist challenge phases you, you brothers, that's for sure. Okay, why don't we wrap it up with one more on-topic question? I think this has been great, and as always, time flies by with you, John and Joe. So Sydney Raptor asks, do the presenters realize that the argument for tool development could also be an analogy for parallel evolution? Two different, unrelated peoples develop similar tools for purpose.
Well, if I can just start with that one and then hand it over to John, you could use it as an analogy for parallel evolution, but it would be a very foolish analogy for one very simple reason. You see, you can trace these boomerangs all across the world, right? But there's one particular group of people that never really seemed to develop boomerangs, and they were the Scots. Now, John is a Scot, or I'm descended from Scots, so I can say this about them. And the Scots tried throwing pieces of wood, and they still throw pieces of wood today, but the pieces of wood don't come back. You know, the old climber tossers, right? Throw the great big tree trunks. They're just great big tree trunks. They see how far they can throw them. And thank goodness that they don't come back. Now, there's one specific piece of difference between throwing a tree trunk and throwing a boomerang, and there's one specific reason as to why a boomerang comes back. A boomerang has been designed to do so. You see, if you get wood, wood is in its natural form, right? If you throw wood in its natural form like the Scots do, it doesn't come back. If you take that wood and you turn it into an aeroplane wing, which is basically what a boomerang is, right? It's curved on the top, flat underneath, which means that when you throw it, the air passes underneath faster than it does over the top, which means it goes up. And if you put a little notch at the end, or we call it an airfoil, right, on an aeroplane, what it means is one side is going to constantly be tipping up like that, which means as it goes up and as it goes round, it keeps coming back round and it comes back to you. In other words, the boomerang has been designed for a specific purpose. And it doesn't matter whether it's an Egyptian boomerang, whether it's a Polish boomerang, North American, South American, Australian boomerang, they have all been designed. In other words, they've taken something in its raw material and they've added intelligence to it. Or other words, they've intelligently added properties that do not come from the materials that it's made of. Now, that is your very definition of a design. If an object has got properties which do not come from the materials that it's made of, it's been designed. Case in point, the boomerang, right? The boomerang has properties, i.e. it comes back to you, that do not come from the materials that it's made of, because the Scots have been throwing wood for as long as we can remember, and it doesn't come back to you. So a boomerang has been designed. Now, if you want to argue for, this is an analogy for evolution, all you've really done is just prove that, yes, you do actually need a creator, or certainly an intelligent designer, right? So you could try and use that as an argument, but it falls down in reality because it simply doesn't work. They all require a designer. Even if you want to argue that each person independently designed it, you're still looking at evidence of a designer for sure. Comments, John?
Well, I'll only make a couple of counter insults to you British. You're actually sort of a Hubbard, so your great-great-grandmother ran out of food in the cupboard, and you're basically Vikings, so that's okay. But can you imagine why the Romans built a big wall across the north of Scotland? Because would you take on people who threw logs? But they did do one thing: they left their bagpipes behind, and so the Scots are known for bagpipes, but we really stole them. And the Romans said, keep them, the noise is terrible. We don't want them back. But the point you've made is excellent, Joe. Parallel evolution is a lie to disguise the fact that both the things you're talking about actually needed creative engineering to start with, particularly the wood one where it's obvious. But if you're looking at us, you have a problem with memory. You're losing your memory. You can't evolve a memory because if you haven't got one, you don't know you're missing it. right? So you'll find that these are foolish arguments. So abandon parallel evolution. Parallel selection occurs, but parallel selection only acts on things that already exist. So if you have blue feathers and you get in a blue tree, then you will be less eaten than a creature that's got red feathers. Now, that's parallel selection. You and I say it results in camouflage. No, it just gets the red birds eaten. So parallel selection, again, is a good example of devolution, not evolution. I don't think we need to say anything more, Donny, but folks, if you caught Joe's comment, he'll be in the USA next year. Perhaps you might want to get in touch with him to speak to your group or whatever. You can have a look at our apps there that he put up before and how to get in touch with them. It's been a great time to see you again, Donny. Glad you're over with your green herbal tea. You're in cold, and we'll look forward to catching up with you again.
I do miss coffee, I have to admit.
Let me
Joe,
just
go
quickly
ahead.
share my screen very quickly, just with this reminder on it of how you can support us. But also, if you are interested in booking ministry, Craig Hawkins is doing a tour of Australia next year. I'm doing a tour of the USA from February to March. So this scans, these QR codes will not only give you access to donate and support us, but they're also to each of our main websites where you can get in touch with us in the USA, in the UK, and in Australia. And you can get in touch with our main representatives, John or Craig in Australia, myself in the UK, and Dr. Glenn Wilson in the USA to book ministry. We're sort of based in Tennessee, spread out of there, up to Kentucky, down to Alabama, across to California, and up into some of the northern Midwest states as well, if we've got enough ministry requests to go there. So do get in touch. And a reminder to, if you're interested in following what I'm doing on a day-to-day basis with the ministry and with the work that we're doing, then go to Telegram, follow me on my channel over there, Joe Hubbard CR. You can search for me. You can use the QR code, or you can use the link there.
All right. That's awesome, gentlemen. I appreciate it. One of the most important, hardest working ministries out there. So John, Joe, as always, excellent program. Real quick to the audience, we'll be back in about an hour for our fourth session of our Defending Genesis conference. This time we're discussing the Trinity in Genesis and all of Scripture. So we'll see you in about an hour. Joe and John, God bless the both of you. And to the audience, thanks for tuning in. Standing for Truth is out.